Chapter 3. Processing. With one signature, I had just signed away my soul. The document glowed faintly as I pressed my thumb to it, then folded itself into a small cube. My bindrune, the one I had created for myself, etched onto its surface. It shimmered for a moment, then fell into Axiom's wormhole. I giggled despite myself at the thought of it spiralling away into some cosmic filing cabinet. The wormhole collapsed, leaving me suddenly alone in an empty room, save for a little sprout in the centre. Suddenly, the sprout surged, growing wildly, surging upward, surreal and alive, shoving aside tiles, reaching and even breaching the ceiling. Its roots twisted and coiled around the walls, cracking the foundation, and a hallway grew from and opened up in the base of the trunk, begging me to enter. The air grew rich and earthy, filled with a smell that transported me back to the childhood woods I used to explore. My breath caught as I reached out, fingers brushing against bark which was rough and sturdy under my hand. It was so real. The sensation made me shiver. I turned, looking for Axiom, and froze. I was no longer in the room, but standing at the edge of a cliff. Below, the ocean roared, waves smashing against jagged rocks. The salty air stung my nostrils, mixing with the scent of the tree, and the sound of the crashing water was deafening. My balance wavered for a moment, and then a cough. I turned sharply and saw her. No longer a void of light, but a woman, around my age, dressed in a dark three-piece suit. Her red tie stood stark against her snow-white hair. She smiled, her eyes like swirling violet nebulae, and gestured toward the tree. I stammered, "It's already started?" She laughs, the sound musical and disarming, and slips her arm through mine. "You're still in the same room," she says, leading me forward. "You'll need to log into Endymion before we can really get started. But now that you're mine, I can edit your experience however I like." She winks, tugging me toward the archway growing at the base of the tree trunk. Down the hallway was another tree. But this one contained within a cathedral-esque space, the stained glass bathing everything in ever-shifting hues as a large crowd of people were slowly making their way towards the tree itself, which sat in the centre of the room. The tree was not organic. It was a huge machine. The leaves were actually intricate solar panels, the roots pipes pumping coolant and cables providing electricity, all delivering life to this great beast. The air here was cool, with a faint hum of current vibrating beneath me. As I started to move forward, people started to crowd around behind me, coming from their own entry points, forcing me onward. There were actually hundreds of people in here. I kept walking. The woman, Axiom, still clung to my arm and was smiling, leading me past those who were taking their time before completing their pilgrimage. Since I didn't have to pay too much attention to where we were going, I watched the others around me. Were all these people here to join Endymion too? I saw people saying goodbye in small groups. Some seemed to have their families and friends there, others just a spouse, or in one case, a dude with a pet pangolin whom he had on a leash. Oddly, I got the impression that it was the pangolin guy who was the most broken up to part, judging by his tearful goodbyes. I saw people at the end of their ropes who looked dazed and lethargic. Some of them were drastically under or overweight. Others were racked with injuries they may never heal from, and some had nearly destroyed their bodies and minds with substances. The flesh is sloughing off their bones. Still others were very visibly mentally ill. Some seemed through severe trauma, and a few far enough down the spectrum that they obviously could not take care of themselves. Nearly all of their eyes were hollow, their movements robotic, as if every step they took toward the tree were both an act of hope and resignation. As I got closer to the tree, I began to see many places in the trunk where people were sitting down. It looked like they were plugging into the tree. Each depression seemed to be uniquely shaped, fitting each person almost like a glove, accommodating their forms perfectly. I could just make out cables attached to the tree, which pulsated with a faint vibration in a rhythm that was much like a heartbeat. Axiom looked back at me. "Just a little further, Leod." Still excitedly pulling me along, her enthusiasm was infectious, and despite my anxiety I felt a flutter of anticipation building in my chest. Now, at the base of the tree, which loomed over me like Yggdrasil itself, I was now only a few people away from the final destination. The tree's trunk was massive, the bark-like surface smooth, but also riddled with intricate circuitry patterns that glowed with a soft bioluminescence. I still couldn't see the process fully, and before I could try another group, caught my attention. I never thought I would see someone restrained like Hannibal had been, but at a connection port, a few to the right of me, was clearly a prisoner, who was very securely chained to a wheelchair, and who was wearing a leather muzzle on his face. Clearly, the man was a biter. The prisoner was accompanied by several police officers, what looked to be a judge, and an older woman who was in tears. Honestly, she looked like she had lost her reason to live, and what little I caught in the tumult of voices around me spoke of dark deeds and a just punishment. I was slightly shocked by this, imagining some kind of punishment realm that the AI rented out to the government, a digital purgatory for those deemed unfit for society. The idea of an AI-administered hell sent a shiver down my spine, and I tried to shake off the thought, but the concept lingered like a shadow as I watched the prisoner get plugged in. His struggles ceasing the moment the cable connected, the calm that spread across his face more unnerving than his rage. As we moved closer, I noticed something strange. The people leaving the chairs looked lighter, freer maybe, but something in their eyes was too calm, like the light in them had been dimmed. Finally, and all too soon, I was part of a circle of people who surrounded the event, which turned out to be an ergonomic depression which rearranged itself for each person in the machine tree itself. Coiled around the chair was a long braided cable that was currently plugged into the neural implant of an old man who sat in the chair. He looked peaceful, his eyes closed, a faint smile on his face as if he had found solace. I had used one of these cables before, when they first downloaded a piece of Axiom locally into my neural implant's hardware. It had felt like plunging my brain into an ice bath, just without the brain freeze, comfortable in a soothing way, but also a wholly alien experience. Another step forward now, and, man, this process is actually going pretty quick, actually. Another minute, and I'll be taking the first step of the rest of my life. I'd be thrown into a test that would allow me to reshape myself, and would actually hurt me if I failed until I managed it. The whole idea of coming out of this machine after 6 months and having lived for 100 years was mind-boggling. Though I didn't manage to fill even 3 of my 33 years with meaning, I couldn't believe that I would make it to 100 without going mad or losing interest. I'm glad it's a bet, instead of a certainty, though. I could already feel my palms getting clammy, my breath catching as the gravity of what I was about to do settled in. This was it. No more rehearsals, no more day dreaming about changing my life. This was the moment I signed up for, and it terrified me. Now suddenly, I'm next in line. I watch the woman in front of me as she settles into the chair. Her eyes are filled with pain. She probably hasn't slept well in years. A solemn-looking man is holding her hand, looking at her with worry and love. She takes the cord, hesitates for a moment, and then plugs it into her implant. For a moment, her eyes widen, then a deep breath leaves her, as if the weight of the world was removed from her shoulders. Within a minute of calm breathing, she rose from the seat, her eyes clear and her posture lighter. She smiled at the man beside her as they walked away, but I felt a pang of dread. Her movements were too smooth, her gaze too calm. It wasn't the same person who had sat down. My legs felt rooted to the ground as the realization dawned. I was next. Oh, God, I saw that girl's soul get replaced. The very moment she gave up control, to see someone become a literal puppet, and to know it is going to happen to me, Axiom takes my head in her hands, smiling at me, and says, "Don't worry, Leod. I'll take good care of her body. And yours too." She guided me to sit comfortably in the chair as 10 or so people all stared at me, just like I had the woman before me, all of them wearing the same hungry and frightened expression. I feel like I am falling down an endless pit, my world spinning around me, my inner self screaming in terror, proclaiming the end of times, that we would never be able to take this back. It raged about giving over the reins to a machine, about existing in an illusion, about giving up on life. I take a deep breath, staring at the beautiful cosmic woman I was about to hand my world over to. Her features were perfect anticipation. It was strange how much she seemed to be anticipating my login. With great care and a deep breath, I connect the cable to my implant.